All right, so this week's topic is from protest to rebellion. This is our third week of the Revolutionary Era, but week 10 overall, so we've come a long way. But this week we're going to talk about everything that happened after the Boston Massacre and up to the beginning of the Revolutionary War. And where we left off last week was in 1770 with the killing of 5 colonists by British soldiers when they fired into the crowd. After that, though, there was a period of relative peace in Boston and in the colonies, where there were very little mob violence. You didn't see a lot of events like this, where you have hundreds of colonists protesting against the British. People still resented the British. People still didn't like the British, but you didn't see the same level of energy as you saw before the Boston Massacre. What sort of re-energizes the harsh feelings towards the British is the Tea Act. If you remember, after the Townshend Acts were repealed, the only tax that remained was on tea, and the colonists continued to boycott it. They didn't buy any tea from the British, and instead they smuggled it from the Dutch. Well, this left the British tea makers with too much tea. They had no one to sell it to, so they just continued to stockpile, and they had way too much tea and nowhere to put it. And so their solution was to remove the tax on tea, and that's what the Tea Act was, in hopes that the colonists would buy it from them. So they removed this tax. The tea is cheaper, but still the colonists say, we'd rather still pay a higher price for tea than buy tea from the British. There's still very harsh feelings there. And when these ships of tea tried to unload their cargo, the colonists refused to let them do so. So King George III and the governor of Massachusetts closed Boston Harbor and said, we are going to unload these ships whether you like it or not, and they're not going to leave until they're able to unload. So they basically stopped all business occurring in Boston Harbor until these 3 ships were allowed to unload their cargo. And this prompted the response from the colonists, and known as the Boston Tea Party, where you have 50 Sons of Liberty who dress up like Mohawk Indians, raid the ship at night, and throw overboard 90,000 pounds of tea into the Boston Harbor. So the colonists' reaction to it was, well, if you want it unloaded, we'll go ahead and do it for you. And that's exactly what happened. As they threw it overboard, they were okay, this week's topic is from protest to rebellion. We're still in the Revolutionary Era, leading up to the Revolutionary War. This week's topic is from protest to rebellion. This is the time period between the Boston Massacre and the actual beginning of the Revolutionary War. And where we left off last week was, again, the Boston Massacre, where 5 colonists were killed by British soldiers when they fired into a crowd. And this happened in 1770, and it was relatively calm and peaceful within the colonies. You still had a lot of people that resented the British, but you didn't see nearly the amount of protesting as before the Boston Massacre. The event that really starts this, re-energizes this dislike for the British and rebellion against the British was the Tea Act. And the Tea Act is actually the opposite of all the other acts. It removed the tax on tea. Because the colonists were refusing to buy British tea, refusing to pay that tax, tea makers in England had a surplus, had way too much tea in store and had nowhere to put it. And so what they thought is, well, if we remove the tax on tea, then the colonists will buy it because it's going to be cheaper. But the British or the colonists said, we're still not going to buy it. We don't like you. We'd rather smuggle tea in. We'd rather pay a higher price than buy tea from you. And so when these ships came to Boston, in particular, into the harbor, to unload their cargo of tea, the colonists refused to let them do so. And so what you had was people trying to, like I said, unload the ship, and the Sons of Liberty were preventing them from doing that. They were intimidating them. And so King George III and the governor of Massachusetts, what they decided to do is close the Boston Harbor and say, we're not going to let any ships in or any ships out until you let us unload these 3 ships. The colonists, again, still refuse. So what they respond with, the colonists respond with, is, well, if you want the cargo unloaded, we'll go ahead and unload it for you. And this leads to the Boston Tea Party. Okay, we have 50 Sons of Liberty dressed as Mohawk Indians. They raid the ships and they throw over 90,000 pounds of tea into the Boston Harbor. And this act of rebellion against the British is, again, sort of that last straw that begins the Revolution. We have a violent takeover of a ship, the destruction of tea and merchandise, and this just again makes King George angry, makes the British government angry, and they respond with the Intolerable Acts. Okay, and the Intolerable Acts are this: they close the Boston Harbor. This prevents business from coming in and out of Boston. The merchants in Boston have no one to sell to. They're not able to get their goods out of Boston, and it really hurts business there. Also, the British government takes over Massachusetts. They take over the control of Massachusetts. They take over the governmental duties of Massachusetts, and people are now under a dictatorship, essentially, from the British government. And then in response as well, they send more British troops to the colonies. What King George III fears, and what others fear in the British government, is that this one act, if they don't respond to this act of the Boston Tea Party, then you're going to see more and more violence in the colonies. So the Intolerable Acts prompt the rest of the colonies to stand by Massachusetts. Okay, colonies like Virginia, Maryland, they send money to Massachusetts, they send food to Massachusetts because, again, they're not able to ship their goods in and out of Boston. Food is not coming in and out. People are starving. People are going through a real tough time, and so the other colonies stand with them by sending money and food. They also stand with Massachusetts by continuing to boycott British goods that come to their colonies, which does hurt the British merchants as well. And then the colonies decide to meet in what would be called the First Continental Congress to discuss a unified response to England. That, again, it goes back to Ben Franklin's original idea that if they stand together, they're more likely to get what they want from the British as opposed to if they're on their own. So they figured they'd be better together. So the First Continental Congress is really all the big players of the time. You have George Washington, Ben Franklin, John Adams, Patrick Henry. All these men joined together in Philadelphia to discuss, again, a response to the Intolerable Acts and a response to King George III. And in this First Continental Congress, you have really three groups of people. You have Loyalists. These are the people that want to stay with Great Britain and remain part of England. You have the Patriots, who are in favor of independence and starting their own country. And then you have people in between, like George Washington, who want more independence, but still want to be part of Great Britain as well. Okay? And what they come up with are a couple of things. One is the Declaration of Rights. What they do is they write out a document and they send it to King George III, and they say to him that an attack on one of our colonies might as well be considered an attack on all of us, meaning that what's going on in Boston is going to bring a response from the rest of the colonies. And they also demanded a repeal of the Intolerable Acts. This is what the Declaration of Rights is. Okay? When King George III gets that, he doesn't respond to it. Instead, he sends more troops into Boston. And he tells General Gage, who is the person that's now in control of Massachusetts, he tells him he wants him to end the rebellion, find a way to end the rebellion. And Thomas Gage says, I got this. So what he does is he masses up his troops in Boston, which is the center of Massachusetts and where most of the British military is housed. What he does is takes his troops, and he hears of a city, the city of Concord, that has a stockpile of weapons. And so his mission is going to send him and his troops up to Concord to get these weapons and to squash the militia that is up there. Obviously, you see there's one town in the middle, and that's Lexington. And when the British soldiers get to Lexington, they meet resistance. Paul Revere and the other spies that are part of this militia of Minutemen, they hear of General Gage getting ready to march to Concord. And so he sets out on a midnight ride along with other people that are part of the Minutemen, and he rides through on the route that we just showed you there. He rides through Lexington, through other small towns, and then on to Concord, shouting, "The regulars are coming, the regulars are coming," meaning that the British are coming and they're prepared to fight. And when the British get to Lexington, they don't meet a whole lot of resistance. They meet a little bit, enough to slow them down, and it's called the Shot Heard Round the World. This is essentially the battle that begins the Revolutionary War. The colonists are extremely outnumbered by the British, but what they're able to do, like I said, is slow them down enough so that the people in Concord are able to prepare themselves for a bigger battle against the British. And when the Battle of Concord comes, that's exactly what happens. The British still outnumber the colonists, 400 to 700, But the colonists are well prepared, and the British are not expecting that. They're expecting an easy victory. So the British lose this battle and have to retreat. And as they're retreating, the colonists continue just to chase them and shoot them, and 40 British end up dying from this battle. And what this tells King George III and General Gage is that these colonists are not going to be easily defeated like they thought, and in fact they're actually prepared for war. And so this is sort of a reality check for the British in that this is not going to be, again, as easy as we thought. This could be a prolonged war, and we need to prepare ourselves for a larger battle. Okay, and at this point, this is the start of the Revolutionary War with the battles of Lexington and Concord. All right, let me know if you have any questions this week. You guys have a great day.